Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to today's CPSMA webinar on preparing for the profession, applying for a teaching vacancy. Before I hand you over to Paul O'Donnell, just a little bit of housekeeping. You are watching in Zoom webinar format, and at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice the Q&A button. Please feel free to use this Q&A button to ask any questions of the presenters or of the CPSMA throughout the event. We have people in the background answering questions, and we will have time to address those questions. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the event, and I'll hand you over to Paul.
Good Leo, thank you very much. And just by way of introduction, I'm Paul O'Donnell, and I'm a principal in St Patrick's National School in Sliane, County Meath. And together with my colleague, Miriam McCabe, who's a principal in Scolwera in Moylough, County Meath, we are both seconded or borrowed from our schools to the Catholic Primary School Management Association. And we're delighted to be with you today to help to, I suppose, guide you through the interview process from the point of view of an applicant. And we've designed it. Many thanks for all your questions, and we've designed it around those and also our perspective from the other side of the table, so to speak, in the interview process. So we're going to actually kick off with a very short, just a poll to get you going before we start. And Leo is going to bring it up for us. And really what we want to know is, which do you consider more important in the process? The job application part, which I will be dealing with, or the job interview, which Miriam will be dealing with? And you'll have about 30-40 seconds to put in your answer there. And while you're doing it, just to explain the rationale here, we're hoping to provide a brief overview of CPSMA as our organisation. And while we operate, or suppose represent about 90% of schools in the country, around 2,800 of them, we will also be giving you a perspective if you are applying for schools of other patronage, like, for example, Community National School, Model Schools, Educate Together, and Forest Petrunica, those other patronages as well. And you will get a copy of a recording of the webinar. You'll also get, I suppose, the PowerPoint slides and the standard application form that I'll speak about. But it might be worth having a pen and paper to one side, or just to open a Word document to take some notes as we go through the presentation. So it seems quite clear 2-to-1 that the job interview is the most important aspect. So, and interestingly, that around 1/3 think the job application itself is the most relevant. So it's actually interesting to see, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. You can't get to an interview unless you have a really good job application put in place. So that's what I'm going to deal with first, is that aspect of the process. So just to begin, very briefly, the Catholic Primary School Management Association, as I said, we represent, I suppose, the interests of around 2,800 primary schools, so 90% of the schools in the country. And boards of management run schools on behalf of a patron. So in our case, as a Catholic school, and my school in Sliane, our patron is the Bishop of Meath. So our board of management runs the school. And for you, I suppose, possibly going into a job in a school, it's important to realize that it's the board of management that are your employer. The department will pay you. But in terms of, you get a contract with the school, and you're, I suppose, comprehended by the board of management who run the school. And in terms of CPSMA, we, I suppose, offer support to chairpersons of boards and also principals in primary schools. And then we would also be involved in advocacy on behalf of schools. So, for example, the return to school now, which is proposed in March, we would be one of those famous stakeholders at the table with the Department of Education. So now let's move on to the process itself. So the first starting point for you as an applicant is when you see an advertisement. So one of the most common queries we got in is, where are the jobs? And there are two places really online, educationpost.ie and staffroom.ie. You can contact those websites and get set up for notifications when jobs come up in your area or locality, or the school perhaps that you've been on placement in, or areas where you would be interested in applying for a job. It's really important to save the ad, because once the expiry date for the ad has occurred, the ad then disappears. So it will have a lot of really good clues for you to tailor your application. Is it boys, girls? Is it co-ed? The patronage, the size of the school, a lot of details that will help you. So I would advise that you print off or save a copy of the ad when you see it. When are jobs advertised? So what tends to happen is panels for permanent teachers will start to clear, generally speaking, in early June, and then schools are allowed to advertise their positions. And there will be a number of different types of positions to be advertised. The process happens, I suppose, in two waves. Schools advertise in early June right up to maybe mid-July, and then it quietens off because schools take a break or take holidays. And then some schools then recruit from the beginning of August onwards. So it's a long process, and there will be plenty of opportunities to advertise, to apply for positions. And then what types of positions are available? So we've got a lot of queries, I suppose, about panels. And just, I suppose, to say that really doesn't apply to you until you're at least in the position for 2 years. But you're welcome to ask queries about that in the Q&A. But I'm just going to focus on you predominantly now. And there are 3 types of positions that you would be applying for. A specified purpose contract really means a position where you, I suppose, effectively get paid for the days that you work. So you don't get paid for holiday breaks. That's the simplest way to put it. And then a fixed term position, on examples of specified purpose, would be a maternity leave contract, carer's leave, or parental leave. The second one then is a fixed term position, and that goes from the 1st of September all the way to the 31st of August. So it's a contract for the full year in most instances, apart from when it begins after the first working day in November. And finally, then, a permanent position, which again means that you are permanent in that school, assuming that the numbers on the roll stay stable and you remain in that position then. And the thing to say here is all positions of 24 weeks or longer, they have to be advertised. So you may have a substitute work for 12 weeks or 16 weeks, and that does not have to be advertised. A principal can ring up and get a substitute to fill that just as they wish. Okay, so that's the advertisement itself. So next of all then is the standard application form. And what we've done here is, again, I've provided a link for you to access this form and to download it. And we're also going to send you a copy of one. But I thought the best way to show you or to talk you through this is actually to show you a standard application form. So what I'm going to do is, bear with me one second. I am just going to bring up a standard form with some hints and tips for you. So this is what it looks like. And you aren't always asked for the standard application form. Sometimes you can be asked just for a CV, but actually completing this will help you hugely no matter which one you're asked for. But predominantly, this is what is asked for. In the first section, you're asked for your own details, and I would say have an email address that you use regularly. Then your qualifications. So you may not have your final qualifications when you apply for these positions. So I would advise that you just write results pending. Similarly, you may not have your teaching council registration at that stage. So again, you'll put in pending. Schools will know this because you've just qualified, if that's the case. And you will have conditional status because of your probation or your dread. Again, details of qualifications. Put the most recent first, but if you are a PME and you have other college qualifications, include them also. The next part then is teaching experience. If you have completed any substitute work, this is the place to put it in. You don't have to list every single day in every position, but you can group your experience by school and just list the number of class levels that you've taught. But this gives an example of some experience that you have as a teacher. You won't have a post of responsibility, so just put in non-applicable. With regard to practice grades or student or school placement grades, in the final year one, now I understand your placement may be listed as pass or fail, or just grade not assigned due to COVID-19. And again, that's what you should include there, and then put in your other grades there. In additional qualifications, any other certificates or courses that you have can go in here. It's really important for a Catholic school that you're putting in your certificate for religious education there. You're just stating that you have it. And all job offers that you get will be contingent on you providing the documentation at a later stage. Unless it's asked for now, you don't have to include it. Other short courses, I would include anything that relates to primary education, a first aid course, any extracurricular coaching courses, for example, ICT, college electives, child protection. They're the places to include those. Really what a school is looking for is evidence of CPD over the course of a number of years. This is a really important area, the areas of special interest, because you will have to choose what are you strong at, what are your strengths. And I would suggest you pick a number of curricular areas, and then beside that, you put in what you've studied. So for example, if you did a specialism on English writing, what you learned, the value of a language in written form, and how will it be applicable to this position? How important, I suppose, it is that writing begins at the very early ages in infants and all throughout the primary school. So you're relating your experience back to school itself. Other employment, for me, it's really important to have, if you have completed part-time work, even if it doesn't relate to school, to put that in, because I see you're somebody who can juggle work and study, and that you have experience of working with people in, for example, a shop or a restaurant or a pub, and you're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, because that's what this role is all about. In terms of your experience or skill, you don't have to put in 150 words. I would say you could consider bullet pointing your answers here, or keep your paragraphs short and separate. Also then, this is the section on ethos, and Miriam will speak about this later, but it's really important. If you're applying to an Educate Together and you put in, I would look forward to upholding the Catholic ethos, I'm sure that's pretty much a no-no for them, as it would be for us. So you have to do your research from the websites on each of the patronages to make sure that it is correct. Also then, just additional information that you can add. And finally, your referees. And again, I would suggest a spread. A school-based referee, maybe a practice placement teacher or principal, a college-based referee, and also a pastoral referee, somebody in your community that you've included, and ensure a mobile number is available. So that's, I suppose, a whistle-stop tour of the standard application form itself. And then back then to our presentation. So next of all is, in general, whichever it is, make sure it's professional and accessible, and attention to detail is important. School principals, we're quite a sad bunch really, but we've spent 20, maybe 20, 30 years correcting copies, checking for mistakes. So spelling is really important. Principal, P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L and not L-E. Little things like that stand out, and you don't want them to stand out. You want things to be, that the focus is on your achievements and what you can offer. Make sure to get permission from your referees. Ask them, can you put their name down? Can you use a contact number? And finally, when you complete a draft of this, give it to somebody else and say, have a look through this and give me your perspective. But I really want as much as praise that it was great, where could I improve it? Don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion. And pester. teachers from school, principals, ask them just to have a look over it. It's very much worth a bottle of wine or a box of chocolates. But people in the education community are generally very kind because everybody started somewhere. So next of all, you will need a letter of application or cover letter to go with it, and it is generally asked. And it is really a condensed version of your standard application form or your CV. And I would suggest it's no longer than a page, and that these are the 6 pieces of information you're trying to get across. The position, your qualifications, your experience, your personal interests, your knowledge of the school is really important, because I would get 20, 30, 40 applications. I note from your school that, and what they're noting has nothing to do with our school. So you should personalize your applications where you can. It's worth spending a few minutes doing your research on specific schools and finding out about them. Now, at the end of this, the slides that you get will also include a full sample letter of application along the lines of what I'm proposing here. But just remember that almost every student in the country this year will get this presentation, so you'll have to make it your own. But we hope that it'll provide, I suppose, a slight template for you in that regard. So next of all then is the deadline has passed for applications. And what happens next? So what happens is that, as I mentioned, the board of management run the school, and they will appoint a group of people who will be in charge of managing this process. And that will be a selection board. That will be made up of the principal, the chairperson, usually, and then a third person from the assigned by the patron as an external assessor. So what we would do then is we take all the applications and then we create a shortlisting criteria. And this is all laid out in a department circular 44/2019. So we have to decide, how do we get this list of maybe 60, 70, 80 people down to maybe 3, 4, or 5 that we're going to call for interview. So the way we do it is, first thing is essential, is the person is qualified. And you have to have evidence of this in your application. So you might be qualified, but if you don't write it down or you forget to include it, you will automatically be disqualified. Similarly, the certificate in religious education for a Catholic school, if you haven't written in that you have one, then we can't include you. And also your registration with the Teaching Council, which may be pending in your case. Then it's down to the post itself. So desirable criteria. And that, for example, would be, is this vacancy infants? Is it in 6th class? Is it a multi-grade? Have we a number of special educational needs in this class? Maybe the school is looking for somebody who's strong in maths or English. So we can include those details as desirable criteria. And then other relevant experience, evidence of teamwork, ICT, subject specialisms. And that will shape what we're looking for. Now, you can't have everything for every application. All you can do is focus at what you think you are strongest at. And that's your, I suppose, priority in this regard. But that's how we then start to whittle down the candidates to those who will be brought to interview. So next of all, we're going to move to the interview. But just before that, we're just going to run another poll now quickly for you before Miriam takes over to speak about the interview process itself. And again, I'm going to ask Leo to put it up. So in this case, the question is, how many of you would actually practice your interview answers with somebody else? And what I mean by that is, generally, would this be something you would be keen to do, or is this something you wouldn't consider doing? That's, I suppose, the point we're making. While you're completing that poll, one final point from me, and that is that on the standard application form, it's not CPSMA advice, but I've just put a pinned thread up on Twitter, and it's at Donegal Paul 9. That's a capital D and a capital P at Donegal Paul 9. So it goes through each section on the standard application form with some hints and tips for you if that's something that you want to have a look at. And so Leo has gone, so, oh wow, 91% would practice interview answers with someone else. Well, I'd say fair play to all of you, because it's not an easy thing to do. And the other thing I suppose I would suggest there is not just to practice them, but also to ask for feedback and to ask for tough questions so that you are really prepared for the interview itself. So I am now going to pass you over to Miriam, and Miriam is going to talk you through the next part of the process.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Paul has gone through the first part of the process, and you're lucky enough now to be called to interview. Usually candidates get a 7 days notice of an interview. So use that time wisely. Figure out how are you going to get to your location and give yourself plenty of time. Questions then would have been agreed under the criteria by the selection panel. And, you know, remember again, they're going to try and get the best out of you. And they're going to try and get you to speak about yourself. And also they're going to try and focus on what are the areas that the school themselves are looking for. Questions, you'll get usually 9 to 12 questions in any one interview time. And the duration of your interview could be anywhere from 15 or 20 minutes up to 40 minutes. The ratification piece, what that means is after the interview has been held, the interview selection panel will mark the candidates. And the highest ranked candidate is proposed at a board of management meeting. Now that can take a couple of days. So, you know, it could be a question that you could ask at the end of your interview as to, you know, when might the position be ratified, or when might the candidate who is successful be ratified. So we'll move on then to interview topics. Now you'll see there on the screen a number of different topics that can be used. You know, you'll have your introduction. Obviously, they'll be asking about your knowledge of the curriculum. Planning is always very important. There's frequently a question around that. Your classroom management, your interactions with parents and how you will communicate with parents and deal with any difficulties there. Child protection, you know, as a teacher, you will be a mandated person. You need to understand what that means. Perhaps there's, they're looking for somebody with a particular knowledge in computers and use of that. The ethos question is another question I'm going to deal with separately now in just a moment. And then there might be something else specific again to the criteria that the school are looking for on the day. I'm delighted to see that 91% of you would practice, because I think practice is key here. And don't be afraid to practice. So if we look now on what are some of the areas that we could focus on. So as I mentioned already, practice. You know, don't come to your first interview as practice for your second one. Put the work in beforehand. Think about the answers and where you can bring in your experience. Answer the question that you're asked, but weave your experience of maybe your school placement or some subbing that you might have done. Now, it is possible that your interview might be online, but don't let that take away from the fact that body language and positive body language is really important. Answer the questions, make good eye contact with the selection board and speak slowly and clearly. Knowledge of the school is something that Paul mentioned already. Do your homework. There's a school website where you might be able to find out about the WSE or a school self-evaluation report. These will all give you valuable insights as to the school. Often schools have their policies on their websites. And if you get a chance, speak to some of the staff or parents in the area. Expect questions relating to staff and to the parents and pupils and working as part of a team. And make sure that you you get across your experiences. So if we move on then to ethos. Ethos, I mean, what is ethos? Ethos is the fundamental character or spirit of the school. It's how we do things around here. It's how we treat each other. It's how we interact and how we care for each other as a community. As a Catholic school, we model and support a philosophy of life inspired by a belief in God and inspired by the gospel values. So that's respect, justice, hope, courage, etc., as demonstrated by Jesus Christ. The school schedule, which should be available to and be seen in all schools, actually sets that out. Religious education then in a Catholic school, we're talking about the Grow in Love program. Some of you might have experienced seeing this being taught or actually teaching it yourself while you're on school placement. The Grow in Love program is thematic, and it sets out the let's look, let's learn, and let's live methodology. And it's actually a very nice program to teach. Paul mentioned other patron bodies, Church of Ireland, the Educate Together, you have the Community National Schools, you have Forest Patrunata, and you've got other religious denominations such as the Muslim schools. If it is a thing that you're actually applying for a job in one of those schools, make sure to do your homework. It's really important to research the ethos of the different patronage, and you'll often find a lot of valuable information online. What do they stand for? And tailor your answers to suit that. More frequently now, we use scenario-based questions in our interviews. And the reason for that is that they give us a sense of not only what you understand, but how you would behave in certain circumstances. The scenario type question can vary greatly, but we're going to share an approach with you now, the STAR plus E approach, that might help you in breaking down and working out an answer for a scenario. So the STAR plus E, and we added the E here, which stands for experience, and you'll hear us repeat that again and again where possible. Talk about your experience. So the STAR, it talks about situation, task, action, and result. So take situation, for example. That's about setting the scene. Take the scenario and put it into a context so that you're in control of the context. You know, try and include personal experiences. When I was in school placement, there was, and then allude to your experience at the start. And if you can do that at the start, it actually frames the answer and to a way that suits you best. The task will describe the aim or the purpose. So what's your first priority in the situation or the scenario that they've given you? Your action, explain what you did. So, you know, you're teasing out the situation here. Who did you involve? It's not assumed that you would do everything yourself. So what role might there be for a colleague, another class teacher, or the principal in any situation? The result then, show that there's some sort of follow-up. What was the outcome of what had happened? And the plus E, your experience. And we can't emphasize it enough. Where you can, add in your experience. Relevant areas of professional development, any, you know, areas of interest to yourself that are relevant to the question. You know, assume that the board don't know your application off by heart. So what we're going to do now is, myself and Paul are going to model a scenario-based question for you. And I want you to pay close attention to I'm going to ask Paul the question, and I want you to pay close attention to Paul's answer in terms of the content, but also watch for his body language and his tone. So the sample scenario question is there. While on yard duty, you notice pupils gathering at the far end of the yard and two pupils engaging in a physical fight. How would you deal with this situation?
Well, I suppose I would hope that this wouldn't happen in a yard that I was in. I haven't had that experience before, but that's obviously just been on school placements. But if it did happen, I think I'd definitely be splitting them up as soon as I can, and getting everyone else away from the situation. And then I'd have to talk to them and try and find out what happened, and then call either the class teacher or the principal to assist, because there would obviously be some problem, I suppose, that they would have to be resolved, and their parents would have to be involved. And I mean, I'd say that'd be very serious, and to have to deal with something like that. Am I on the right track, Marion?
Okay. Well, it wasn't wrong, and technically it was correct. But you can see maybe there was a little bit of lack of content. If we think back to our star situation, there was no real depth of knowledge. He didn't really weave too much of his personal experience into it. And it's difficult enough on screen to see body language. But again, it could have been a little bit different. It could have been stronger, more positive. Will we have another go, Paul?
Go for it. So in that kind of scenario, I think, first of all, I'm going to assume that this is a senior yard and we have pupils maybe from 3rd to 6th. So with a big crowd like that, it would become obvious very early that something is going on. So as I would approach, my main aim here would be to de-escalate the situation. So I would get in and ask the pupils to separate. And if they didn't, I would have to put myself between them both. And second of all, then I assume there would be another teacher on the yard with me or another staff member, and I would ask them to assist to disperse the crowd, to get everybody away so we could start to calm the situation down. I think really what really be important here is both of these children would be very emotional. They would have a lot of adrenaline running. So I would separate them in 2 different sections to cool down for a few minutes. And I wouldn't actually speak to either of them until they have calmed down. And instead, I would go to maybe those who had seen what had happened to get some independent views on what had occurred, just to start to form a broad view of what had happened. And then I would speak to them both separately and try to just elicit from them what were the triggers and how this began. If that was maybe 10 minutes from the end of break, by that stage, I'd say break is over. So I think when the teacher came out to collect his or her class, then I would inform them and give them what I had kind of collated at that stage. And I would obviously be available then to either the class teacher or the principal in any follow-up with regard to the code of behavior in the school. And now I haven't had this kind of experience before in a yard, but I have done some work on restorative practice in college. So if maybe this kind of issue was a regular occurrence in school, that would be something I would be more than happy to share with, maybe as part of Crow Park hours for the staff, or even in my own classroom as a teacher to maybe help to change that type of culture in a school.
I'm sure you all noticed the difference. And if Paul doesn't mind putting up the slide there on the star, and we'll break it down and we'll just see straight away it was an increased complexity in Paul's answer. He spoke with more depth, and you'll see where he added in experience where he could. So he set out, if we look at the situation, he hadn't actually had experience on yard, but he had a number of situations. He was able to speak to, situation that he put himself into. He immediately framed his answer within his experiences. Looking at task, de-escalate and resolve straight away. And he talked about moving the others away. His immediate reaction. He was able to show us how he would, deal with this situation, which would be quite intense, but he was able to calm it down. His action then. He included an in-depth description of what he would do and who he would engage with, including other members of staff. He was able to show where he looked for assistance, and then the bringing out of the investigation piece and the reporting piece, all far more in depth in this particular answer. And then, of course, the follow-up, the most important piece really, in that he's able to show his knowledge of school with regard to code of behavior and, you know, the longer piece as to where this is to go. Throughout it all, he was able to, you know, weave in his personal experience. He spoke of his professional knowledge and how it could be useful here. He was easy to understand, and he had very positive body language and clear delivery. So well done, Paul, on that. Now, just for yourselves, we're going to give you some sample interview questions to look at. And we're going to give you about 4 minutes just to jot down 2 or 3 bullet points as to how you would answer each of them. And then we'll go through the main points of what we would like to hear articulated in your answer. So for 4 minutes, there are 5 sample interview questions there. And if you would just, as I say, 4 bullet points for each.
And just while participants are, while you're just, I suppose, jotting down those main points on interview questions, thanks a million for all the engagement. We had loads of great questions coming in there during the event itself. And so we're delighted to get that kind of engagement. Miriam is a very tough interviewer. I think that's why when I had the second chance to speak there, I kind of felt I made a bit of a better improvement. She can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, and she's the same in the office. It's don't be. I still wasn't prepared for it even when it came that way, but such is life.
I don't think so now, Paul. I don't think so.
But I
read up the questions.
But I suppose one of the things from our side of the table, so to speak, of certainly for me, and I know Miriam would be the same, that my sense of an interview is to give participants the best possible chance of getting themselves across. So it's not a case where you're coming in for a grilling, so to speak. We want you to feel comfortable and relaxed so that you can answer the questions as best you can, that it's not tense and it's not a kind of a stilted environment, although it is difficult to do that because you appreciate that people are feeling under a little bit of pressure and obviously nervous in advance of it. But that's generally our sense of it. And I think increasingly that's the way it is going. So don't ever be afraid during the interview to clarify questions, or as Miriam said there, to put a scenario in place to answer one. If you're asked a very general question, like I did, where I said, okay, I'm going to assume this is 3rd to 6th class. So you can tailor the question to suit yourself and frame it in a way that suits you best.
I would say too that subbing is a great way of getting to know the kind of settings that you yourself are comfortable working in or would prefer to work in before you kind of agree to any long-term working piece. For example, I work in a rural school. I'm a teaching principal, and I love that. I've worked there. I've worked in, as a teaching principal for 14 years, but certainly in a rural school for a number of years, and I like that. But I do know we've had people in and out through the years who preferred that more urban, that larger school setting. So, use subbing or even on school placement to try and get a sense of what it would be like to work in a school of that particular size, and it's a great way then of kind of getting to know where you flourish best.
Mm-hmm. What suits you best. And you'll also really find, even though you may not have a huge amount of experience teaching, you will have been exposed to so many interventions in schools like paired reading or station teaching, lots of those types of I suppose activities and events that you can say you were a part of it. You don't have to say that you led it or you organized it all, but just that you have had experience of it. So you'll be surprised when you go through the standard application form, the kind of evidence that you do have at your disposal across those areas that Miriam mentioned that come up in the interview.
I think we've used up our 4 minutes there, Paul, and we'll start going through
Sure.
the questions now. So if we take the first one, tell us a little bit about yourself. I often wonder, do the candidates think, have they not read my application here, you know? But it's more about giving you an opportunity to settle yourself in, if you like. It's that kind of, you know, time where you get to hear yourself speak in the room, I suppose. So, you know, you don't need to start at, you know, your junior infant days from school and work your way through. We're just looking for something like a 3-minute background on your education specialisms or, you know, your personal interests. And it's, you know, that little introduction piece where you get to settle yourself down and to order your thoughts. And then, you know, the interview panel are very interested to see how you would frame that introductory piece on yourself as well. So if you look at question 2 then, if I told you that you would have 2 other special education needs teachers in your class for 6 weeks from 2 to 3, how would you utilize them best? Well, I suppose the first thing that you'd need to figure out or discuss here would be the purpose or the plan. How would you plan to make the best use of these teachers? So you're looking at station teaching here. You'd consider why you're having this intervention, and you'd have to obviously discuss how you would, you know, figure out what are the needs of the class. You'd need to consider and identify, are they literacy or numeracy needs? You could discuss whether you would do a pre-test or a post-test. Whether or not you'd have stations that were teacher-led, discussing whether you know, breaking down the class. It's all about the plan that you're going to create here to make the best use of these teachers. And of course, you'd be talking about, you know, reviewing the process and looking at what's working and what's not working, and working as part of a team as well, because, you know, that's one of the main things we're trying to figure out in an interview process. Are you actually, you know, going to be a strong team player for us? Number 3 there is how you would deal with an irate parent who calls to you as you're bringing your class into school first thing in the morning. This is a question I frequently asked and frequently comes up in interview situation. So, you know, the most important, I suppose, advice we could give around this is that you stay calm, you know, you don't react. A parent is going to be quite, if they're irate here, they have worked up this head of steam about what it is they want to say to you in that moment. And they really are not conscious of the fact that you have a group of children which you have to supervise and get into class. So, you know, I always find it's better to use language as, you know, around, oh, I understand you have a concern or an issue, rather than use the word complaint. Now, it'll be impossible not to listen to somewhat to the parent at this point, but obviously you're not going to be setting about resolving it and having an in-depth discussion on the doorstep of the school. So you're going to have to, when you get an opportunity, just inform the parent that you need to attend to your class, but make an appointment to speak to them at a later time. There may be a communications policy in the school, and it would be one that you would need to be familiar with, you know, around making appointments and when in dealing with people like that. If the complaint is continuing, or if it's something that when you're new in school, it's very difficult to be all knowing, but there are colleagues there. There's a principal in your school. Don't be afraid to go and take advice from them around how best to bring resolution to the situation. We mentioned the ethos. There's, you know, if you are doing an interview in a Catholic school, you will invariably be asked an ethos question. And generally speaking, it's around the Grow and Love Religion program. So again, you will be able to discuss the methodology used there. Maybe you'll be able to speak to your experiences, the fact that there are online resources and supports. It's a very teacher friendly. I'm old enough to remember two previous iterations of the religious education program, and I really do feel that the Grow and Love is very teacher friendly and gets very positive feedback from the children. So, you know, you'll be able to talk about the class level. So if it is for a junior class that you're doing the interview, then you will research that particular class level and be able to discuss perhaps the themes that come up for that particular level. And then, of course, what do you consider to be your main strengths as a teacher? Well, here, you know, it's going to be a very personal answer here. Very, you know, is it empathy? Is it organization? Are you a good listener, good at planning? Hopefully you like working with children. Have some examples of your own, you know, to be able to back up what you feel your main strengths are. And again, I've said it before, try and speak to your life experiences. Above all, you know, as Paul mentioned, we're trying to get the best from you on the day. We do accept and understand completely that you may be nervous and that nerves do stop somebody from being totally themselves. But the interview panel are there to get the best person they can for the school, to get the best fit that they can for the school. And, you know, you can do your bit by coming along, having your homework done, and, you know, putting the best you can across. But don't be too disappointed if it doesn't work out on the day. It may be that the interview with the school were looking for someone with another specific criteria that they met. And as I say, I wish you the very best of luck with all of your applications and your interviews. And hopefully today has been useful to you. I'm going to hand you back to Paul now to finish up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Just cúpla rudí beag faoi dheara. So first of all, we would say download a standard application form, try to fill it in draft form now to get just an idea of this process, because it will help you, because you'll be in a mad panic in June. You'll have exams just finished. You'll have lots of other things going on in your life. Hopefully the world will be a bit more normal than it is at the minute, and you might have other priorities. So this is an opportunity to get some thoughts down on paper. The next thing then is find help. And I would suggest that there definitely teachers from placement, principals from schools that you've been on placement with, ask them to look over your application form, and family members or maybe your friends to check your work with each other. And also, if you're called for interview, that you get somebody to ask you questions or give you a mock interview if possible. I mentioned already the notifications of vacancies. You can log on to those websites and have yourself getting those notifications now, from now on. The next thing then is, it is a tough, I suppose teachers in general, you work hard in primary and secondary, we're generally rule followers, and then you go into an interview process and maybe you don't get called for interview for quite a while, or you do and you don't get a job. And that may not be necessarily something to do with you, but just things that other candidates have, experience they have. So be persistent and stick at it, and don't be afraid to stick at it. I was really heartened to see that so many of you would ask somebody else to ask you interview questions or to go over them with you. The other thing as well is, in terms of assumptions, never assume, as Miriam said, that the interviewers know everything about you. We could have 3 vacancies, which means we could be interviewing 10 people. And with the best will in the world, I won't have at my fingertips every bullet point about you. So in your interview, make sure to say, as you will have seen in my application, so that you're drawing people back to your application to consolidate points that you make. And finally, just to say, my experience, and Miriam and I have spoken about this in advance, the standard and caliber of students that are coming out now in the last number of years from the colleges is just phenomenal. The attention to detail, the professionalism, the planning, just the maturity and preparation is brilliant. And schools love to see new people coming into the school. I love certainly having students in the school and new teachers, because everybody new changes the dynamic of the workplace. They bring new energies, new energy, new ideas. And so you'll be really welcomed into schools. And just to say that I really wish you the very best in your teaching careers. And don't be afraid to believe in yourself. You've put a lot of work and time into getting this far. And this is just the next stepping stone is about to begin. So we will wrap it up there, and Gurmila Maiga Valig, and best of luck to you all. I will forward on the documentation and presentation to Aisling Tuhl, who I'd like to thank also for organising this on your behalf. And without further ado, I wish you a very good afternoon. Gurmaiga Slán.